Okay, let's unpack this. I want you, right now, to just for a second close your eyes.
Yep.
Forget all the health advice. Forget your meal plan for the week. I just want you to picture the perfect French fry.
Oh, okay.
I mean, not the floppy, sad ones you find at the bottom of the bag. I'm talking about the platonic ideal of a French fry.
The absolute gold standard fry.
Exactly. The color is this deep honey gold. You lift it up, and you can almost hear that little sizzle of the oil still evaporating off the surface. And the smell hits you first, right? That rush of hot fragrant oil. It's a scent that just, it triggers something primal. It's pure instant satisfaction.
It's one of the most recognizable food smells in the world.
And then the texture. You bite down, and it's not some soft, mushy thing. It's an aggressive, beautiful crunch.
Yeah.
A tiny little explosion of salt and crispiness, and then it gives way to that pillowy, steaming, soft potato center.
It's arguably the perfect food. It's a delivery mechanism for salt and fat, and it's something people love just all over the globe.
Right. And that's what we tell ourselves, isn't it? It's just potatoes.
It's a vegetable.
It's a vegetable. It's got potassium, some vitamin C. Sure, it's high in calories, maybe, but it's not. It's not poison. It's not like I'm downing a can of soda.
Or so we thought.
And that is the mystery we are diving into today. What if the very process that creates that perfect, crispy comfort food also creates an invisible, complex health risk? A risk that completely dwarfs our simple concerns about calories or fat.
For decades, the actual science connecting potatoes to the risk of type 2 diabetes T2D was, frankly, a total mess.
A mess how?
Just completely inconsistent. Researchers couldn't get a clear signal. They kept getting conflicting results because, as it turns out, they were tracking the wrong thing.
But today, we're not talking about those old studies. Today, we are revealing the findings from what is, it's the absolute pinnacle of nutrition research.
We're talking about massive long-term studies, the kind that followed tens of thousands of people for 30, even 40 years, and they finally cracked the code.
They figured it out.
They finally managed to separate the innocent, fiber-rich boiled potato from the chemical danger lurking in the deep fryer. Our mission today is to show you exactly how the preparation of that potato dictates its role in your long-term metabolic health. It's a story of chemistry completely trumping the nutrition label.
And the key statistic is, it's honestly startling. We're looking at data that shows high consumption of potatoes, and specifically French fries, is significantly linked to a higher risk of T2D.
Yeah.
And the number you really have to remember is 33%.
That's the one. The combined data from these huge U.S. studies showed that eating 7 or more servings of total potatoes per week,
which is just one serving a day.
Right, just one a day. That was linked to a staggering 33% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to people who ate less than one serving a week.
33%, that is not a small number. That's not a marginal finding.
Not at all. And what's really crucial here is that this number, this 33% increase, it held up even after the researchers statistically controlled for everything else.
You mean like smoking or not exercising or eating other junk food?
All of it. They adjusted for every major lifestyle risk factor you can think of. And the risk from the potatoes, especially the fries, remained.
Which forces us to ask the real question. What in the world is happening to that potato chemically when it hits that back of high heat oil? Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The potato itself, if you just look at it from a pure nutrition perspective, sitting there on the counter, it's not some evil food.
No, not inherently. It's a starchy vegetable, yes, but it does contain good things. It has fiber, it has important B vitamins, vitamin C, a lot of potassium.
So in a vacuum, a simple baked potato is a perfectly fine source of energy.
It is. So the question is, where did this historical fear about type 2 diabetes risk even come from in the first place?
Right. What was the original villain in this story?
The villain was its molecular structure. The challenge is the sheer volume of carbohydrates packed into that potato and, more importantly, the type of starch they contain.
Okay, explain that.
It's mostly something called amylopectin, which is a kind of starch that is very, very easy for our bodies to digest. So when we eat it, those starches break down into glucose, into sugar, extremely quickly.
So it's basically like a fast-track delivery system for sugar straight into your bloodstream.
Precisely. It's a rapid breakdown that causes a very quick and a very high spike in blood sugar. Nutrition scientists call this a high glycemic index, or GI, and when you eat a decent portion, it's a high glycemic load, or GL.
And that quick spike is the problem.
It's the problem. That rapid flood of sugar demands a massive response from your body. You have to release a huge wave of insulin to deal with it. And when that's repeated over and over, day after day, for decades, it really strains the system. That's the classic understanding of why potatoes might be an issue for metabolic health.
Okay, so if the high starch, the glycemic load, was the central problem, then all the studies should have shown the same thing, right? They should have all come back saying, yep, more potatoes equals more diabetes risk.
They should have.
But that's not what happened back in the, say, the 90s and early 2000s. The findings were all over the map.
Completely contradictory. It must have driven researchers absolutely mad. You had some perfectly good, reputable studies that showed a positive link. They said, yes, high potato intake increases your risk.
Expected.
Right. But then, right alongside them, you had other studies showing nothing.
Yeah.
No statistically significant link at all.
Okay, that's confusing.
And then, to make it even more confusing, there was a small handful of studies that actually found an inverse association.
Wait, inverse. You mean they suggested potatoes were somehow protective against diabetes?
Exactly.
How does that even compute? How can a single food be both protective and a major risk factor? It makes the science seem, I don't know, totally unreliable.
And that's the key. The science wasn't unreliable. The methodology and the context were just incomplete. That inconsistency was really rooted in three major blind spots in that earlier research. Blind spots that these new, huge studies finally fixed.
All right, let's break down those three blind spots. What was the first one?
The first one was just not appreciating the massive regional differences in consumption and diet patterns. The phrase potato consumption doesn't mean the same thing everywhere.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about a study participant in, say, Italy or Sweden 20 or 30 years ago. For them, eating potatoes often meant boiled potatoes, maybe served cold in a salad or baked. And crucially, they were usually paired with things like lean fish, lots of olive oil, and high-fiber vegetables.
Okay.
Now, compare that to a participant in one of the big American cohorts. For them, eating potatoes primarily meant French fries.
And what were those fries served with?
Large portions of sugar-sweetened sodas, processed red meat like burgers, and refined white flour buns.
That comparison changes the entire context. It's the difference between a pretty neutral carb source in a healthy meal and a high-fat, high-sodium, low-nutrient bomb.
Exactly. The preparation method and what we call the plate mates, the foods it's eaten with, are everything. So that was blind spot number one.
What was number two?
The second was a huge variation in methodology, specifically how long they followed people. Many of those older studies only collected dietary info at the baseline.
You mean they asked people what they ate just once?
Just once, at the very beginning of a 5 or maybe 10-year study. But people's diets change over time, they shift, lifestyles change.
So if a participant just changed their eating habits 5 years into the study, the researchers would be working with completely useless data.
Essentially, yes. And that's why these big Harvard cohorts, the Nurses' Health Study, or NHS, and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, are considered the gold standard of this kind of research.
Because they did it differently.
They didn't just ask once. They tracked hundreds of thousands of people, starting way back in 1976 for the first one, and they collected repeated, incredibly detailed dietary data every 2 to 4 years, for decades. This allowed them to calculate a cumulative average intake over a person's life, which is absolutely essential if you want to see the long-term impact of a habit like eating fries. You need to see the exposure over decades for a disease like T2D to develop.
That is meticulous long-haul science. Okay, so that's two blind spots. What was the third, and you said most critical one?
The third was finally having the statistical power to rigorously control for what we call confounding variables.
The other lifestyle factors.
Right. The old sort of simplistic assumption was, well, people who eat a lot of fries are just generally unhealthy, so the fries are taking the blame for everything else. They thought the potato was just a marker for a poor lifestyle.
So the potato was basically taking the rap for the cigarette, or the lack of exercise, or the double cheeseburger it came with.
Precisely. But these high-quality, long-term studies used incredibly sophisticated statistical models. They could finally isolate the effect of the potato and, crucially, its preparation method by stripping out the influence of all those other things.
So they could digitally remove the effect of smoking, alcohol, physical activity, red meat, sugary drinks.
All of it. They untangled all those messy wires. And when they finally did that, when they applied that rigorous control,
The true villain was finally revealed.
and the conclusion was crystal clear. The association with a significantly increased risk for type 2 diabetes was overwhelmingly, massively concentrated in one category: fried potatoes.
French fries.
French fries. When the researchers looked at boiled or baked or mashed potatoes, the risk was there, but it was much, much weaker. But the real smoking gun was the substitution analysis.
What's that?
That's where they calculated what would happen if you replaced just a few servings of fries per week with whole grains instead. And the risk just plummeted. The preparation is the single biggest driver of the danger.
So it really isn't the innocent spud. It's the violent, high-temperature oil bath that it takes. And we have to talk about that oil because the kind of oil used has changed a lot over the decades these studies were running.
It's been a constantly moving target of danger. When the first nurses' health study began in the mid-70s, a lot of commercial fries were still cooked in things like beef tallow or other highly saturated animal fats.
Oh, eh?
Then the industry shifted. They moved toward partially hydrogenated vegetable oils because they were cheap and gave the fries that great texture. But in doing so, they introduced massive levels of industrial trans fats.
The same trans fats that we now know are catastrophic for heart health and inflammation.
Yeah.
The ones the FDA finally had to ban in 2018 because they were so bad for us.
The very same. So for a huge chunk of the study period, participants were consuming fats that we now recognize as being profoundly toxic.
It's not just the type of fat, right? It's how it's used.
Yes. There's the issue of how the fat is treated in a commercial setting. Deep frying involves heating the same batch of oil over and over again to very high temperatures. Food scientists have a term for this. They call it thermally abusing the oil.
Thermally abusing the oil, that sounds bad.
It is. This process releases a bunch of toxic compounds, including one called acrylamide, which is a known irritant and a potential carcinogen.
So every single element of that final French fry, the high starch potato, the high salt, the high fat, and now these chemical byproducts from abused oil, it all contributes to this perfect metabolic storm.
And we can't forget the final layer, the ultra-processing. Most commercial fries aren't just fresh potatoes cut up and fried.
What are they then?
They're often par-fried, then frozen, and sometimes coated with things like dextrins and sugars to help them brown better and get that perfect texture. This makes them an ultra-processed food, which is already, on its own, strongly linked to a higher risk of T2D. The deep frying step is just the final disastrous act in a long chain of industrial processing.
Okay, so we've established the whole environment. The frying is bad, the oil itself is bad, the processing is bad. But I want to get truly microscopic now because the data suggests there's something else happening here, something that goes beyond just simple weight gain or excess fat. What is happening chemically? When that starch and that intense heat collide in the fryer, that specifically targets how our insulin works and our risk for diabetes.
This is where we shift from general nutrition to really specialized food chemistry. The temperature of that oil, we're talking 350, 375 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 180 Celsius. That temperature is the catalyst. It's what turns simple ingredients into these microscopic, highly reactive metabolic threats.
And you said there were two main classes of these threats.
Two main classes of compounds that form when starchy foods meet high heat and fat. They are extremely dangerous to the systems that regulate our blood sugar. I call them the invisible chemical threats.
And they are.
Advanced glycation end-products, which we can call AGEs, or glycotoxins for short. And the second one is acrylamide, or ACR.
Okay, advanced glycation end products. That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. We absolutely need to simplify this. Let's use the analogy. How do we understand what AGEs are in the context of our daily lives?
Let's think of your body as a massive, high-speed metropolitan traffic network.
Okay, a traffic network.
Your blood vessels, your cells, the complex systems that manage insulin delivery and signaling, they all depend on smooth, efficient traffic flow, no gridlock.
Smooth traffic means good health, efficient metabolism. Got it.
Exactly. Now, these AGEs are actually a natural result of something called the Maillard reaction. This is that incredible, complex chemical cascade that's responsible for all the good stuff, the browning and flavor of toasted bread, a seared steak, and yes, the beautiful golden color of a French fry.
So the very thing that makes it look and taste delicious is the visual sign that these compounds are being created.
It is the visual marker of the creation of these glycotoxins. It happens when sugars react with proteins or fats under intense heat.
So back to our traffic analogy, what are the AGEs doing?
When you eat foods that are extremely high in these dietary AGEs,
Yeah.
and that's pretty much any fried, grilled, or heavily processed food, it is the equivalent of having massive, unregulated dump trucks constantly pouring highly reactive inflammatory debris directly onto your city's major highways.
So a constant, pervasive traffic jam made of metabolic garbage.
And that debris, it doesn't just sit there. This flood of dietary glycotoxins completely overwhelms your body's innate system for clearing out inflammatory material. This sustained attack triggers powerful inflammatory mediators and causes extreme systemic oxidative stress.
Okay, remind us what oxidative stress is again. That's the whole idea of unstable molecules damaging our cells, right?
Yeah, think of oxidative stress as rust, but happening inside your body. You have these unstable molecules called free radicals that are constantly trying to steal electrons from stable molecules, and that process causes damage to cells and DNA.
And our bodies can fight this.
Your body has antioxidant systems designed to neutralize this rust, but when you flood the system with AGEs from fried food, those antioxidant defenses just get overwhelmed. They can't keep up.
And this is something we can actually track in the bloodstream, right? We can see this happening.
We can. When the body's being overwhelmed by this AGE-induced oxidative stress, certain protective systems go into overdrive. One of the key antioxidants your body uses in the environment outside your cells is uric acid.
Okay.
And what we see is that high intake of foods rich in AG, so fried foods, red meat, sugary drinks, it leads to elevated levels of serum urate or uric acid in the blood.
So the thing that's supposed to protect us when it's overproduced becomes a marker of danger.
It becomes a very valuable marker of systemic oxidative stress. And this is the bottom line, that systemic inflammation and that oxidative stress are known to profoundly disrupt how our insulin signals to our cells. This leads directly to insulin resistance, the primary precursor to type 2 diabetes.
That makes the AG connection so clear. So they don't necessarily destroy the cells that make insulin, but they create this body-wide inflammatory fog that prevents the cells from hearing the insulin signal. They gum up all the traffic signals.
That's a perfect way to put it. The insulin arrives at the cell, but the delivery points, the receptors, are all blocked by this inflammatory debris. The message can't get through. And that brings us to the second invisible threat, acrylamide.
Acrylamide, ACR, another product of high heat and starch. How does this monster operate differently from the AGs?
Well, if AGs cause systemic traffic jams that lead to insulin resistance, acrylamide is more like a targeted poison attack that damages the factory itself.
The factory that makes the insulin.
Exactly. ACR is a compound that's formed when starchy, sugar-rich foods are cooked above 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And the key thing to know about it is that it's classified as a known toxin and a probable human carcinogen.
Probable carcinogen. Okay, that gives it a very different, much scarier profile than AGs. Let's fire up the second analogy. The video game one. How does acrylamide target our diabetes risk?
Okay, let's imagine your pancreatic beta cells. These are the specialized tiny little factories deep inside your pancreas, and their only job is to produce and release insulin. Let's think of them as the primary energy core in a high-stakes survival video game.
The power source for the whole game.
Right. And these cells are already, just by their nature, very vulnerable. Their normal job, just sensing sugar and making insulin, it generates a lot of natural damage.
So the normal byproducts of making energy, these reactive oxygen species, or ROS, are like a constant low-level drain on the energy core's health bar.
Exactly right. About 90% of those ROS come right from the mitochondria inside the beta cells themselves, so they are always fighting a low-level internal rust problem.
Okay, so where does acrylamide come in?
When you consume high levels of acrylamide from French fries or even burnt toast, it gets into your bloodstream very quickly. ACR is highly reactive. It's what's known as an alkylating agent, which means it binds easily to DNA and proteins. So in our video game, it's like launching a toxic, low-level poison attack that specifically targets the integrity of that energy factory.
So ACR is an external poison that makes the internal stress that's pretty happening in the beta cells even worse.
That's it. It significantly increases oxidative stress and causes biochemical problems directly inside the pancreas. This directly damages those crucial beta cells. It can impair their ability to sense glucose, disrupt their function, and can even lead to beta cell death over time.
And without healthy beta cells,
you can't produce enough insulin, your glucose metabolism fails, and type 2 diabetes becomes inevitable.
wow, that distinction is so powerful. So just to recap, AGEs cause body-wide inflammation, which leads to insulin resistance. The delivery truck can't get its package to the door.
Right.
While acrylamide causes direct toxic damage to the factory that makes the delivery truck in the first place, leading to a failure of insulin production.
They are twin chemical threats, and they work together. And we know this is a real-world risk, not just a theory, because scientists can use biomarkers to track it.
They don't just have to ask people what they ate.
No, they can measure something called acrylamide hemoglobin adduct levels in people's blood. It basically tells you how much acrylamide has been incorporated into your red blood cells over time. And studies that look at these objective measurements consistently show a link between higher exposure to ACR and a higher incidence of diabetes. The chemical damage is literally showing up in people's bodies.
It makes total sense now why the link to French fries, which maximize the production of both AGs and acrylamide, is so strong. So much stronger than any other way of cooking a potato. Okay, so the deep fryer is a chemical monster factory. We've established that. So naturally, the consumer market, driven by health trends and people still wanting that perfect crunch, it invented what seemed like the perfect solution.
The air fryer.
The air fryer.
Yeah.
It became wildly popular. The promise was simple. Get that same golden, crispy perfection, but with drastically less oil. And on the surface, this sounds like the perfect fix. We cut the fat, we cut the trans fats, we get rid of the acrylamide from abused oil, and we still get the crunch.
And the initial benefits are, they're undeniable. They are significant. Studies that compare hot air frying, or HAF, to traditional deep fat frying, DFF, they show that the air-fried version can have up to 7.5 times less fat content.
7.5 times less? That's huge.
It's a huge win for managing calorie intake and the risks of obesity-related diseases. We also slash the amount of oil that gets absorbed, sometimes by over 50%.
Okay, that sounds like a complete and total slam dunk. Case closed. Everyone buy an air fryer. But based on your tone, I suspect we are about to hit the paradoxical twist in this story.
We are.
What did the food chemistry research find when they looked beyond just the fat content?
This is where the science gets really interesting. Researchers did a head-to-head comparison of deep frying and air frying, but they weren't looking for fat. They were looking specifically for the production of those heat treatment contaminants we just talked about: acrylamide, ACR, and another glycotoxin called HMF.
And did the air fryer, the healthy option, eliminate or reduce them?
It did the exact opposite. The surprising and honestly pretty unsettling finding was that hot air frying actually induced significantly higher levels of both acrylamide and HMF compared to traditional deep fat frying.
Wait. Hold on. Let me just process that. The method that is marketed as the healthier alternative, the appliance that millions of people bought specifically to avoid the dangers of frying, is potentially increasing their exposure to probable carcinogens and glycotoxins.
That's what the research showed.
That is completely insane. How is that even chemically possible?
It's what I call the great consumer blind spot, and it's all driven by the simple physics of heat transfer. To understand it, you have to remember what an air fryer actually is. It's not really a fryer. It's a very small, very high-powered convection oven.
So it's circulating incredibly hot, dry air.
Exactly. Intense heat, often comparable to deep frying temperatures, so 350 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's using dry air, not liquid oil, to transfer that heat.
So dry heat versus being submerged in oil, what's the difference?
When you drop a potato strip into hot oil, the oil immediately creates a barrier around the food. The heat transfer is incredibly fast and efficient. It cooks very, very quickly, and that forms a protective crust almost instantly.
Okay.
That rapid cooking time, ironically, can actually limit the duration of the internal heat exposure, which restricts how far the Maillard reaction can go.
But in the air fryer, it's different.
In the air fryer, because the heat transfer from air is less efficient than from oil, you often need a longer cooking time, sometimes 15-20 minutes, to get that same golden texture and soft interior.
A longer exposure to intense heat.
A longer exposure to intense, dry heat. And that environment aggressively promotes the Maillard reaction. That browning process that we want for flavor and crispiness is precisely the process that produces the acrylamide and HMF. The lack of an oil barrier and that prolonged cooking time in a hot, dehydrated environment pushes the formation of these contaminants to a higher concentration than you get in the quick, brutal bath of a deep fryer.
So the consumer's making a trade. They're trading a risk they can see and understand obesity and heart disease from too much fat for a risk they cannot see. An invisible risk of high exposure to chemical contaminants that cause cellular damage and inflammation.
That is the trade-off, precisely. And it forces us to completely rethink what healthy cooking even means in the modern world. We can't just look at a nutrition label anymore and judge a food by its fat or calorie content alone. We have to start considering the invisible chemical byproducts of convenience.
This research really proves that as consumers, we are overwhelmingly focused on fat reduction, which is a good goal. But we're completely unaware that we might be inadvertently increasing our lifetime exposure to toxins like acrylamide, compounds that are strongly linked to pancreatic damage and T2D risk.
It's a critical finding for public health. Because if the air fryer presents this paradox, then what is the solution? Are we just doomed to either eat soggy boiled potatoes or risk this chemical damage?
Well, you mentioned there's a really promising new avenue coming out of food science labs, this idea of pre-treatment. You called it a superhero suit the potato can wear before it goes into battle. Tell us about that.
This is a very exciting development. Researchers are looking at applying specific coatings to foods before the frying process. One study focused on pectin-based solutions. Pectin is just a natural fiber you find in fruits like apples, but they enhanced it with antioxidant extracts, specifically olive leaf extract.
Olive leaf extract. Why that?
Because it is packed with polyphenols, which are incredibly powerful natural antioxidants. The effect of this coating is twofold. First, the pectin creates a physical moisture barrier on the surface of the potato strip, and that barrier physically reduces how much fat can be absorbed during deep frying. They saw reductions of up to 55%.
45% less fat absorption. That's a massive win right there.
A huge win. But the second function, which is maybe even more important, is what the antioxidants do. The polyphenols in the olive leaf extract actively work to scavenge the chemical precursors that are needed for the Maillard reaction to happen, especially under that intense heat. They basically disrupt the chemical pathway that leads to the formation of acrylamide and HMF.
So by applying this natural antioxidant-rich coating, you're hitting both goals at the same time. You drastically reduce the fat absorption, and you cut the formation of the chemical monsters, acrylamide and HMF. And this works in both deep frying and air frying.
It works in both. It is a really profound potential solution. It suggests that the future of healthier fried foods might not just be about buying new appliances, but about using these targeted food treatments.
But until those treatments are standardized and adopted by the food industry, or become something we can easily do at home, this paradoxical trade-off between lowering fat and increasing chemical contaminants, it remains a pretty harsh reality. Okay, we started this deep dive with the simple pleasure of a perfect French fry. We traveled through the decades of inconsistent research, we met the two chemical monsters, AGEs causing systemic inflammation and acrylamide causing direct cellular damage, and we just wrestled with the crazy paradox of the healthy air fryer.
It's been a journey.
So, pulling all this data together, what is the simple, actionable takeaway for the person listening right now who wants to enjoy potatoes without dramatically increasing their risk of type 2 diabetes?
The overarching public health message is, thankfully, very simple and extremely actionable. It's this: preparation matters more than the food itself.
The potato isn't the villain.
The potato, when prepared correctly, is not the primary villain. The preparation is the primary driver of risk because it's what determines whether you're consuming a moderate, digestible source of carbs or a huge load of inflammatory glycotoxins.
So what does prepared correctly look like in the real world?
Baked, boiled, or steamed potatoes, when eaten in moderation, are just not linked to that severe long-term risk profile that we see with French fries. So when you eat potatoes, prepare them simply. Avoid adding tons of fat, salt, and sugar. A neat little trick is that allowing boiled potatoes to cool down can even convert some of that starch into something called resistant starch, which slightly lowers the glycemic load. The effect is modest, but it's something.
I think for me, the most powerful takeaway from those huge U.S. studies was the idea of substitution. It's not just about taking out the bad stuff. It's about actively replacing it with something we know is good for us.
Absolutely. The research on substitution was so compelling. The beneficial effect was strongest when people consciously chose to replace French fries, or any potato serving, with whole grains. The data showed that replacing just 3 servings per week of any kind of potato with healthier alternatives like whole grains was associated with a measurable reduction in T2D risk.
So instead of fries, have a side of brown rice or quinoa.
Exactly. Whole grains, legumes, and non-starchy vegetables just offer a slower energy release, way more fiber, and a much lower overall inflammatory load on your system.
Okay, so let's leave the listener with a concrete visual rule they can use tonight at dinner. The American Diabetes Association's plate method.
The plate method is great because it has this beautiful visual simplicity, and it helps you manage both the portion size and the quality of your food at the same time. Just imagine your dinner plate divided into sections.
Break down those proportions for us.
You should fill half of your plate, the biggest section, with non-starchy vegetables.
So broccoli, spinach, carrots, a big salad.
All of that. Then, a quarter of your plate should be reserved for a lean protein source: chicken, fish, tofu. And finally, Only the last remaining quarter of the plate is for your carbohydrate source.
And that's where the potato fits it.
That's where it fits. That quarter of the plate can be your brown rice, your quinoa, or, crucially, a moderate serving of a starchy vegetable, like one small big potato.
And that visual trick immediately fixes the volume problem, right? It forces that starchy food into a proper balance with high-fiber foods and protein, which naturally slows down how quickly the sugar gets into your bloodstream.
Precisely. It comes down to moderation and preparation. Avoid the deep-fried, heavily processed versions whenever you possibly can, and embrace substitution. Because we've seen today that the true danger of the potato isn't the starch it holds, it's the inflammation and the chemical damage created during that high-heat frying process.
And that air fryer paradox just throws this gigantic wrench into all of our old assumptions about what healthy eating is. It proves we can't just judge our food by the traditional nutrition labels anymore.
Which leaves us with the ultimate, really provocative question that I think will shape the future of both personal health and public food policy.
What's that?
In a world that's now dominated by instant processed foods and high-heat convenience cooking technologies, is the most important element of public health now about managing the invisible chemical byproducts of that convenience, the AGEs, the aramides, the HMFs, rather than just focusing on fat, sugar, and calories. That's the real frontier of the deep dive.